Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. I am your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It is my delight and pleasure to introduce you to my guest on this particular episode, and it's Sivarama Krishnan. Uh, Siva is joining us from Madras, currently the Chennai, that is the contemporary name. Siva is an outstanding researcher, and he works at the very fascinating interface of ultrafast and ultrasmall. He is an excellent experimentalist and also has done some very interesting work pushing the limits of femtosecond to attosecond lasers, and he's also involved in next gen photolithography and various different methods of utilizing light and studying light matter interaction. So welcome to Pratidwani, Shiva.
Thank you so much, Pawan. It's indeed my pleasure to join you on this, what I should say now, very eminent and sought after podcasts. I've listened to several Pratidhwani episodes myself, so I can learn about colleagues here in India. And indeed, I should say it's a great venture, and I hope this grows from strength to strength. And this, I would be contributing as a little cog in this wheel. I'm really delighted that we can just have, as you said, an open, informal chat about the things we love to do and our own little histories and journeys, and communicate this to our, say, especially younger colleagues, students, researchers, and others to give them a feel for what it is, and that it's, after all, a very worthwhile journey.
Thank you very much. So, Siva, we're going to get started with your own background. Tell us about your upbringing. Where were you born, and what really brought you to science, and what really brought you to experimental physics? That is also another thing I'm very fascinated to learn about. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Ever since you pitched this thought, and especially the last few days, I've been listening to people and also asking myself exactly what converged to where I am. Well, before I tell you everything, I think all this thought led me to one conclusion, that I'm destiny's child, so to say. I
Okay.
don't think I can claim credit to have planned anything of my own, or, said, okay, this is my straight path to, from here to here to here, and that's where it is. Maybe my parents, they had something in mind, but they never told me. So that's also something. Yeah, I will ask my mother later what she had in mind, but I didn't want to that I didn't want that to influence this conversation, because so far I haven't thought so much about it in the better part of 45 years. I was born in Chennai, not very far from where I'm residing now. I don't live on the IIT campus, but I should say further
Oh,
south from there, and I've come closer to where we lived for a good part of my nurturing years up to the age of 10. Um, so my parents were pharmacists by education. They both had bachelor's in pharmacy degrees, and I think that's how they met and got married. I so far didn't have the courage to ask them to tell me the whole story. You know how their generation is, but I think I'm gonna do that also now, because I know that their wedding was not. Well, I mean, they chose each other and so on. My father,
nice.
whom unfortunately I had only till the age of 10 and lost him pretty early, he was a startup founder initially. In current parlance, the word startup was invented back then in the 80s, until when he sort of lived a little before the 90s. He passed away. But he was, for the better part of what I remember, he was running a pharmaceutical unit which manufactured suspensions. And my mother, she has, for all I know, been a government servant. She was working for the quality assurance unit of the Department of the Defense, Ministry of Defense, not Department, Ministry of Defense in
Nice.
DGP. So she was an analytical chemist, and this was the sort of humble beginnings. And we lived for until my age of about 8, almost opposite the Chennai airport, but one has to sort of had to maybe go a few kilometers down across the road to find a sort of not a settlement, but like quarters, and like how the defense ministry often has. You have offices, you have quarters, and everything. An estate, maybe I should call it,
Mm-hmm.
where the at least one of the parents very likely worked in this place, and kids live. I mean, the family lived with their kids in this defense quarters, and I went to a school there with, and it was looking back a very very interesting school, because this establishment I think had started was there for a long time, but a lot of civilians coming and working was probably relatively new. There was no school within this estate which spanned a few kilometers, so kids would have had to go considerably outside of that to find a school and study. So a few ladies, among which my mother was one, women, I must emphasize, not so much the
Mm-hmm.
men, is what my mom says. They pitched the idea of having a Kendriya Vidyalaya there inside this estate, or the central school as it's also known. So then their ministry and others supported it. This is, I think, typically what is happening now when a new IIT, or what we call centrally funded institute or technical institution, IITs, ISERs start. They start looking for making a school and maybe a little hospital for medical care and so on. So they did made a school. But what was the school, and where were you to house it? While the permissions came, apparently there was no funding or anything allocated yet to make buildings. So these ladies, they realized that the men were having a little, I should say, a shed-like structure, which they were using to play table tennis and some kind of indoor sports. So they kicked them out literally and said, "This is the school." They took a unilateral decision. So it was a very interesting setting. This was my like kindergarten and probably first couple of years of school. So it was a huge, shed, a shelter where you had two classes. I think the lower and upper kindergarten happening at either end of the hall. So if one of the teachers was a bit louder than they would be, the other teacher would say, "Please hush it a bit." Like I'm also talking to my kids here, but I think these are very very faint memories, but nonetheless, quite vivid because of the nature of things. But then they really persuaded them to have build up the Kendriya Vidyalaya pretty soon. It took a couple of years, and the buildings came up, and the school started. So this was a very interesting system, because it was a residential system. You could walk from home to school within a very secure environment, and in between the bare ground was your playground. So it was really fun. Now looking back, it's like unbelievable that we can have this in today's setting with such grown and populous cities. This may be very difficult to even imagine. So that was some schooling. Early schooling, we had, of course, very nice dedicated teachers, most of them ladies in the early years, except possibly for the physical training teacher. And simultaneously, my father was trying to, have his startup survive the initial um, things, and I have vivid memories of, say, visiting him in his enterprise, and they would be doing production. It got me, introduced to conveyor belts, and at some point, I was probably small enough to climb it up and stand on it too. So that for me remains still a fond memory. Meanwhile, my mom, her office or workplace was a chemistry lab, so to say. But I don't really wish to say that that's what influenced me to take up science or whatever. But it was really fun to go there. And after school, there was no childcare. This was the childcare. So I would just go up to her office, and she or one of her colleagues, one of my fond aunties, there, whom we are still very close friends with. They would serve me up some biscuits and something to drink and stuff like that. And I would sit there for a bit, do my homework till my mother allowed me to go and play and things like that. But then I did see all these, a lot of chemicals, but the thing that fascinated me the most was the Bunsen burner, right? That you could have gas come through a pipe and it lit it up and so on. This was nice. And later on, what a coincidence! I would uh, go and do my PhD in the city where Rudolf Bunsen actually did his work, Heidelberg, and there is
Wow.
even a statue of Bunsen there. And I had this unique pleasure of taking my mom there, and we have a pic with Mr. Bunsen's statue and so on. It's quite something. Very pleasant
Wonderful.
historic coincidence. Um,
Yeah.
but my mother, I think a lot of our maybe subsequent thought process happens in the sense of our parents maybe narrating stories, telling things which forms our initial thoughts and minds. So my mother, I realize now, is a very very analytical person. I
Mm.
have rarely spoken to her about science or what I do. And sometimes I call or talk to students and colleagues on my phone, and my mother often overhears these conversations. And later, nowadays, she comes and says, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I have used an FTIR spectrometer." Of course, she's an analytical chemist, so she does that. She knows about the UV visible absorption spectrometer, blah blah. But rarely did we speak. I mean, knows meaning she knows. She's a practitioner, was a practitioner and a user, and so on. So my mom had this habit of treating everything like what I would now call a chemistry lesson. She also
Mm.
educated me how to prepare my own little meal when I was graduating from school. But then it was not that you have to do this, 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 this. This is the recipe and steps. She always told me something with a sense of logic and flow as to why you had to do this and why this way, why that way. So now I look at this very popular channel called Masala Lab, run by this gentleman called Krish
Mm.
Ashok, an IT
Krishna Ashok.
engineer
Yeah.
turned science and food nutrition popularizer. So
Mhm.
he now tells us about the chemistry and science behind behind Indian food, and it really deja vu's in my mind in the sense that, of course, my mom didn't tell me about all the molecules that were happening, but it was process and it was soft matter process power. So literally wonderful
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
I'm I'm a tolerable cook because of that, but I probably don't practice it enough, which remains my wife's complaint. But then these things, I think, make a lasting impression on us. But
Impression.
my sorry, one.
Yeah. Yeah. No. No. Please go ahead. Because please go ahead. Please go ahead. Yeah.
And my father unfortunately passed away when I was 10 years old in a
Mm.
road accident. While that was unfortunate, I still have very fond memories of him. He instilled two, I think, very important ideas or values in my head. One, that you must work very hard and enjoy it and be passionate and stand on your own legs, as to use an Indian phrase and a Tamil phrase,
Yes.
Sonda Kalla Nikam, as they say in Tamil. That was his idea because he was totally frustrated with working for others and the uncertainties of the job market back in the pre-open economy, in the pre-90s economy. So it was really, looking back, a very very bold move, not just of him but a few of his peers from a little village near Madurai called Arupukotai. So
Mm.
they all of them had just bachelors then. I think doing a bachelor's then, I often say, is like doing a PhD, is like getting a PhD today.
Mm.
That was the pinnacle of the university education which we could manage, right? Or of course,
Absolutely.
people did study more, but it was quite a challenge. He was the first. He and his I don't think he had an immediate brother, but his closest. brother, both of them did bachelors, and they basically changed the trajectory of their rural family, making a living out of partly agriculture, partly also weaving. My grandparents, this was something maybe I should say I was fascinated by looking at the handloom machine, which was in my native village home of my grandparents. I visited it only twice, and it's quite a fascinating thing. And the mechanism of any loom, I'm sure, fascinates a child, like a loom, a sewing machine, and in my
Mm-hmm.
case, the kitchen being a semi-chemistry lab, like setting with my mom. So my father taught me about this and the fact that you need to really work hard to do this, and he encouraged me to play sport as well, very very much. In the sense, so he initiated me to playing cricket as any Indian parent often tends to do. But
Mm-hmm.
he was probably a bit visionary. He told me, I will take you for tennis coaching, which never really happened. But that was because Boris Becker, the young little German kid, won the thing, and he was like very fascinated by it. So these were some initial impressions towards, I mean, part of my childhood that I recall. I'm not very sure I really connected consciously with all this into making a decision to being in science. But I went to a boarding school after the age of 10 in Uti, Udagamandalam now, which was a convent run by the Sri Satya Sai Central Trust, which is a philanthropic trust uh, based on the spiritual guru Sri Satya Sai Baba, who's of course no more. That was a wonderful school in the sense that it was on a hill with a little playground and everything. And I went there purely by accident because after my father passed away, my uncle, who lived in Bhopal then, decided to take me along and try and educate me there. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things, that transition didn't really work out very well in terms of trying to get a school admission all of a sudden. School admissions then and now are still a challenge. And my mother had moved houses, and the landlady of the house, she was. Devotee of this religious group. And she said, see, there is a school in Uti, and Uti schools start the academic calendar in the winter. So if your son has lost a few months, why don't you just try over there? And my mom, just out of nothing, wrote a letter to the principal of the school. And that really got me into the ambit of the principal of the school, Mrs. Gauri Roy, whom we fondly call Roy Auntie, who virtually had been my equivalent of my grandmother till she passed away a little before the pandemic. And she was very kind to encourage her to apply, and I got into this convent, which was a beautiful journey for about 2 years, living in this idyllic setting, and all kinds of beautiful scenery around and all that. I think that's like perfect school atmosphere that one could have asked for. And and then I they had a school only up to the seventh grade. And after the seventh grade, they shifted students who still wanted to continue in the same system without change to this little village called Puttaparthi, not very far from Bengaluru, which is where I studied for the rest of my education until my master's in physics, with a 3 year interlude to do a bachelor's in physics in Whitefield in Bangalore. I mean, I think that Whitefield is like very, very different. Like
Different from.
nobody who sees Whitefield today will ever relate to what we saw then, and other whether it's Whitefield or Krishnajapuram or whatever. But it was a completely residential system. So I've been out in and out of that campus only when I entered and only when I exited it, and so on. But I have no complaints about it. But this got me into this very fascinating educational system about which, uh, without tending to be do any marketing or advertisement, I would probably later want to say something more, because I'm sure you and I, we have common friends whom we both know
Yeah.
much better than we do each other because of this. One of the very important things about being in this residential school is it's a very self-sustaining system. So little students from classes of whatever on the, four or six or eight or 10 or 12, everyone contributes to a living ecosystem called the hostel, where even a little kid can do non-dangerous jobs and take care of a lot of things and so on. That ingrained a lot of self-reliance into
Yeah.
us. That was a wonderful system where there was discipline without too much imposition. Right, you had to wake up
Mm.
at 5 a.m. and more or less, your day till 10 p.m. bedtime was very set. Whether and it was a holistic set of activities. Being coming from a sort of religious background of the philanthropic organization, you were asked to like even do prayers and things, but across various religions. Although there was one maybe dominant culture like in the country,
Mm.
you really appreciated a lot of things. Maybe there's something more to say about that. But in my school, we all had this very legendary, influential physics teacher called Doctor. He is now Professor Shailesh Srivastava. He was teaching then in the high secondary school. Later, he transitioned. Actually, for a lot of time, he was teaching in the higher secondary school, class 12 physics and MSc and MTech classes in the university. Like it's a very, very unique thing to do, right? And he had a
Absolutely.
PhD and so on. And getting taught by him, but not only him, a whole team of extremely dedicated teachers who imparted both what we would call modern education, as well as there was tremendous stress on human values, stress without giving stress, but it was ingrained in everything we did as part of life there. But then coming to science, it takes maybe three classes to become a total fan of Shailesh sir, as we call him.
Mm.
I wish I had that ability because he would just walk into the class with nothing and then, teach you. I've never seen him in school teaching bring any piece of paper to a physics class. He absolutely like knew everything. But well, I'm quite sure that's possible with some practice. But what really stays with me even today, and I don't think I can get out of it, is to really seek intuition in every bit of physics that you do. That
Mm.
of course there is knowledge, there is understanding, and some insight, and possibly intuition, if we can call it that. This very intuitive way of presenting physics to us makes us, I think it shapes our thought process quite a lot. Not just me, but also many of our common friends and a lot of students who ended up, being fascinated by that way of doing physics and took up physics. So that was, I think, the biggest early influence that I can point to in doing that. I spent like a year and a half outside the academic setting in industry in IBM semiconductor R&D in Bangalore. Why I bring that up
Mhm.
is like I clearly see that the way I approached even working in a non-academic setting was very driven by trying to uh, you know, get some insights into what we were doing, other than just doing a technical job, which of course makes this fun, and we can't sort of take ourselves out of it due to that. So that was a very early influence which made me influenced me to take up physics. So this was, I would say, the first very nice thing that I cherish, and I'm still in touch with my teachers, and we often have some chat. But then undergrad education there at in Satyasai University is remarkable. I mean, it's a remarkable educational setting. I must say that I often joke with my mother that I have almost paid nothing for my education because my
Wow. That's
education was
amazing.
in Kendriya Vidyalaya, which then charged 5 rupees a month as school fees, which has to be paid in 3 monthly quarters, 15 rupees, which is even then not such a significant amount at all. Then I went to Satya Sai School, where education is free. The university there, education is again free. You only paid the charges for only the food, actually, not nothing much more in the hostel, and so on. So in the undergraduate setting in Whitefield, we had tremendously dedicated teachers. Professor Rajkumar Jain, Professor K.S. Umesh, Professor Umesh, he made one of the first biggest impressions on me in terms of optics, because he had a
Mm,
PhD in optics in doing holography. He had also done his PhD in Satya Sai University, which is now called Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning. It's a deemed
mm,
university, and
mm,
UGC has this habit of sometimes they allow them to insist they should call themselves universities. At other times they say no, you should not call yourself university and all that. So be it. Um, so Professor Umesh, he set up some very beautiful optics experiments with very small resources in this college. And my only sort of dilemma, if anything, was when you do BSc honors, you need to choose between math, physics, and chemistry. Right? I like chemistry because my mom had this
mm.
chemistry leaning.
Yeah.
But then at that time, unfortunately, I thought you had to memorize a lot of stuff, which is true for the way biology and chemistry are taught in school and in college. I dropped off biology, which again I tended to like, but I thought I simply can't hold that much stuff in my RAM and hard disk in my head, so forget about it. Similarly, it was chemistry, but I really loved various aspects of physical chemistry and was trying to find some method to what it was. We had excellent teachers. It's purely my inability. But now I do a lot of work where I require chemistry, and the only chemistry I know is high school and bachelor's chemistry, even
Mm,
today. But they did such a fantastic job that I think that really holds Professor Ravi Kumar, Professor Sundaresan, Professor Narhari. They did an amazing job. But when it comes to physics and optics, Professor Umesh or Umesh sir taught us. I mean, he made me do my first Michelson interferometer when I was in my um, third year, in the first semester of third year of physics, and a whole lot of other things. And he actually he still held the hologram he had recorded of a swan as a PhD student, and he demonstrated that to us in third year BSc. Like, then if you I mean, it's almost inevitable that you fall in love with optics when your teacher does this in your third grade, right? I still don't pull it off while
absolutely.
teaching physics. I wish I could. Electronics of Professor Umesh was also excellent in microprocessor and instrumentation. In the early 90s, there was, I think, AppLab or another company in India. They made microprocessor boards. So he taught us how to do assembly language programming in 8085. And you literally could, and they had LEDs, so you could see a lot of things moving. It was also slow enough. And then electronics, Professor Jain, he maintains a fantastic undergrad electronics lab, often even
Mhm,
putting in his own financial resources to stock up the lab, and we never felt that anything was um, missing or lacking. By the way, that's not true in the IITs. I must say, often times we may or may not be able to supplement the lab well enough, but such was the dedication of our teachers. Like, he taught us in bachelor's about the concept of an isolation transformer, which even today, like when we set up labs, it therefore you immediately know that the UPS should have an isolation transformer, and not all colleagues are aware
mm,
of this. But that thanks to my teacher. The third passionate teacher was Professor OSK Shastri, who's now in Himachal University. He actually is now a very integral part of the Indian Association of Physics Teachers and does a lot of things in physics education. Is a fascinating person, maybe even a candidate for Pratidhwani, if I may say so. He has
yes,
made
yes.
little kits and a lot of things. He introduced in 1994, introduced us to MATLAB on the only one and
Wow.
only. Windows 386 system, which we had
Mhm.
in our lab, and to interfacing, devices, how to move a motion stage using a serial port, and all these things. So I think this really prepared us for doing a lot of experimental physics if one wanted to, and particularly with optics. Then MSc was an even more fascinating journey.
Mhm.
So we were nine of us in the masters in physics
Fabulous.
class, and into the scene enters this remarkable gentleman called Professor Srinivasan, who still lives in Bangalore.
Yes.
A
R.
remarkable
Srinivasan.
person.
R.
This
Srinivasan.
R.
R.
R. Srinivasan is the IIT Srinivasan. This is Professor K. Srinivasan.
K. Srinivasan. Okay.
So
Okay.
after we have a chat, I think we you can also attest this with our common friends Manohar and Anshuman about
Yes.
Professor
Yes.
Srinivasan, a remarkable character in a positive sense, I say. And
Mm.
he set up a beautiful optics lab, but imagine it was not just him. We had It's a very small university with only like three to then the teaching strength was about just four or five professors. Professor Srinivasan
Mm.
had done his postdoc in NRC Canada. He was a spectroscopist by training, very fascinated by optics and theoretical physics. He was,
Mm.
if you loved physics, you loved him. If you did not, then you probably were, a strong arm to do a lot of physics, which you may not have thought about in a MSc curriculum. Then, yes, we had an excellent nuclear physics lab. Not had even today, they have an excellent nuclear physics lab headed by
Mm.
Professor K. Venkatamnaya. He was an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow, AVH Fellow. He just came from GSI Darmstadt to this little hamlet in South India to teach physics. Quite a remarkable thing. Professor KBR Prasad, I think he was a master of electronics, had done his I don't know if he had a PhD, I must check, but he was in ISC when this university
Mhm.
started. He decided to come and teach. He was there. We had excellent math teachers, Professor Jaganmohan Rao. I think he is by far the best math teacher I've ever had, because he made you feel that math was very easy. Only in the exam you found out without his assistance how what the real analysis topology and stuff could be. And Professor G.V. Prabhakar Rao, he was a amalgamation between math and computer science. In fact, I vividly recall he took all the undergrads and showed them a program that did towers of Hanoi on the computer. So they had a towers
Mm.
of
Mm.
Hanoi in front of it, the computer, and said, "You try this out," and you try, and after a while give up, and then the computer did it in 30 seconds. So this is something we saw, and this was the time when even IITs first got some computer systems. So it was a fantastic setup to grow in. In fact, to do any nuclear physics experiment, you need liquid nitrogen. There was no liquid nitrogen plant in the village, so uh, we would actually accompany a faculty or a research scholar to go to IISc to assess, to just bring 2 cans of liquid nitrogen across 150 kilometers, sometimes in a bus, but later on using a taxi. So this was an amazing setup to grow in. And sorry, I know I'm belaboring this point a little too much, but
No, no, this is fantastic. Please, please go ahead. Please go ahead. This is fascinating. Please tell.
I mean, how to teach optics, right? And I
Mm.
would add electronics. Do we teach that on the chalkboard or what, right? Yes, there is some chalkboard instruction, but then there were and are still such fantastic optics labs, in the sense the same optics lab where PhDs, even if they were only a few, were doing research, was accessible to a master's student, right? So, to put it that way,
Mm.
as an MSc student, one of the experiments that we did with a Nd:YAG laser, they had a somewhat, I'd say, very energetic Nd:YAG laser which produced nanosecond pulses, and it was a 1 joule 10 hertz laser, quite a lot of energy, but it pumped a dye laser, and it also pumped a titanium sapphire laser which could make mode locked picosecond pulses. And yes, this is something which even not even PhD students always get access to. So, as an
Mm.
MSc student, one of the experiments in the final semester of MSc was to literally see optical phase conjugation with carbon disulfide, and you would not believe a MSc class of 9 students, all of us aligned a four-way mixing experiment in masters and got it to work with fairly minimal assistance, because the labs would run for like a week or something, and you had almost the whole evening to do it. And also whenever the professor allowed you to, which was more often than not. So two of us or a few of us were taught how to turn on the laser. We turned it on and then
Mm.
worked on it and literally saw the phase conjugate mirror reflecting stuff. So transient gratings and all these things being taught in masters was quite amazing. Nonlinear, of course, in linear optics was taught from nothing except Born and Wolf. Professor Srinivasan would not
Mm.
allow you to touch like anything else, and to be exposed to such a classical mechanics was only from Lando Lifshitz. Goldstein was given a little bit of respect, but he would say that I
Mm.
don't want to see you with Goldstein in my presence. I'm like, no, no, only Lando. What was that? And optics was only Born and Wolf. You cannot bring Gunther or something else and talk to him. Like he would just, I think he would take the book away from you and not give it back. You have to read Born and Wolf and assimilate it. Terrific. Then nonlinear optics from Boyd and Yariv was taught in
Nice, nice,
masters. There was
nice.
a separate one on nonlinear fiber optics by Agarwal, but then we knew some MATLAB, so we were encouraged. In fact, it became part of somewhat curricular activity to solve like nonlinear Schrodinger equation for this in fibers. So reproduce that figures in Agarwal's GP Agarwal's textbook. So this was amazing looking back that we got so much of not only emphasis but such exciting optics education in our master's level. So that is
Fabulous,
I'd say
fabulous.
university education, and I know it was. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a long ramble, but I thought this should be justice. We should do some justice to my amazing teachers. Their dedication and everything is something I think if I emulate a fraction of it, I would do my job.
Fantastic. This is absolutely magnificent, Siva, because this is also the crucial element of laying a good foundation. In fact, that matters a lot. In fact, that's probably one of the main reasons why we should pay more attention to primary education also. And you will see that that has effect all throughout the life. And you can see that the benefits are reaped even up to the time when you become a professor. Because that really gets kind of registered in your mind what a good education has done to you, and also in the way it helps you to kind of pay it forward. That is something which is very very fascinating. See, one of the things I want to just kind of ask you a little bit more is this amazing kind of times in which you also were educated in without having to really take a very expensive route. The quality of the education what you've got is very very high. In fact, we're going to come to the PhD part also in a few minutes. But you did emphasize that quality education at a kind of a expense which is amenable to even lower middle class people. For example, I studied in a lower middle class kind of a family, and I could really afford something. And even for people, middle class people, and people who were having educated parents like you had, uh, 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 this is something which is something we have to really emphasize on, because we are all kind of products of education system where it was not very expensive for us to really get a good quality higher education also. To be very frank, even at the MSc level, the fees I paid for my masters in physics was very nominal. In that way,
Did you do your
do you
MSc?
think
Sorry, just if I
Bangalore
may
University,
interview
Bangalore
you
University,
for Bangalore. Oh,
yeah,
oh, wow, fantastic
Bangalore
place.
University.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a good, reasonably good place. Great for theoretical physics. We also had some dedicated experimental physicists. who really kind of had a very important impact on. So tell us about that economic aspect, Shiva, which is an important aspect, which is very critical for anybody's education.
Yes, so like we were discussing that okay, in my case, I had the sort of right or whatever we may call it of not having to burden my family with my educational expenses at all. So it was very comfortable for my parents. Initially it was the Kendriya Vidyalaya system, the central school, which still is a large part of central schools are not only good, they are quite reputed too. And I think there are good and bad expensive private schools too. So I don't know if there is such a great correlation between quality and expense. Though I think these are local effects. But then this was quite a remarkable thing. It made a big impression on me, I should say, because I realized when I went for my PhD to Heidelberg in Germany, which was after teaching a few years in Satyasai University. I even initiated my PhD work over there, but then our the teaching system, I should call it the UGC teaching system, puts a lot of demand on teachers. I mean, this is something maybe college students don't see, that they have to
You're
teach
right.
about 16 hours a week per mandate. Even if the university wants you to have lesser teaching hours, it's not often possible. So to do research alongside was not easy. But then, as a pretty young person, you and with this being the only thing in life, especially I mean, education, not just teaching,
Mm, mm.
but the whole holistic sort of education system which was there. We dedicated a lot of time for research over there in the Satyasai University. As people who are teaching a lot of work. But the point I'm endeavoring to make is that education being so to say free or taxpayer paid, as we should probably rightly call it, made a big impression on me, because when I went to Germany, this is exactly what I saw. My peers there had not paid any school fees, so to say, and they had a very local school. And I think you can even go only to the neighborhood school in Germany if you were seeking to go to a private to a public school. Then my often the initial conversations I had, I was very curious. I used to ask my peers like, "So why did your parents not send you to a private school?" They said, "Why would my parents send me to a private school? It would have cost them maybe 1,000 plus euros or more a month or something like that." And they said my school was just fine enough. I was a bit surprised.
Mhm.
Um, then I said, did you not want to learn something more or have better facilities? I said, we had all the facilities in this government funded public school, and it was fine. And then my colleagues explained to me that only if the economically upper class would want to send their kids to a private school. Sometimes, for say religious reasons, you want the
Mm.
kid to go to a Catholic school or whatever, and you insist on that. And also some international floating population, which there was a bit around Heidelberg. They sometimes sent kids to English medium schools. The public schools were the medium of instruction or the language of instruction was German. So this sometimes forced or it was better for the immigrant population and floating population to send kids to a non-public or private school. In Heidelberg, very close by, in a township called Waldorf, this big German software company called SAP
Mm.
operates. And of course, Indians means software there, right? I mean,
Yes, yes.
cram and do small talk, then okay. But usually, even among the reserved Germans there, if you exchange a smile or something, and especially the more senior people, for whom seeing a non-German person in Germany probably was still something a bit unusual. So
mm,
they
mm.
if they picked up a small conversation and they could speak English, or even with what my tuta futa German or whatever, they had a conversation, they would say India, yeah, software. No, you would say, okay, no Wissenschaft or research and stuff. And, oh, okay. So you can even come to Germany for doing research, not really software and so on. But there was a population of Indians, I think, around in Heidelberg, maybe few hundreds. It is a small university city or town, as they call it. It's also Germany's oldest university.
Mm,
But then, what I'm saying is that this idea of education being free, which in India, growing up, especially in my university, the founder and visionary Satya Sai Baba,
mm,
who
mm,
was a spiritual guru, his lectures and what we would call upanyas, which is also disseminated a lot now even through digital media. He had this notion of education, or what they in this Satya Sai philosophy and system called educare and medicare. They said
mm,
their dicta are that these should be free, and this is, in other words, the responsibility of people and the state. So this seemed in India a very profound idea, even at times mostly only philosophical, because everywhere else individuals had to pay. Now if from that I'm airdropped to a country where this is the norm, this was
mm,
a really hard hitting fact that, oh yes, it is possible. In India, often even now when you talk, I maybe have some dinner banter with my non academic friends, whom I'm very happy to have. They would still many say it's impossible, quality will be compromised. Like, I mean, you have to send your kid to an international school, and to why public universities, of course, they say beyond IITs and few are not so great. So why don't we have private universities, foreign universities like that? We are willing to pay the tens of lakhs or crores for this. So there's in this very aspirational country, we want the best quality of education possible for
mm,
the next generation, which is very true. But uh, I still hold the belief that that need not be coupled with extremely high costs. And I mean, normally now, some even colleagues who send their kids outside, I mean, to a no, to a private school, pay something like the almost 2 months of their
yeah,
reasonable pay for school education. It is substantial. We simply
absolutely.
don't realize that. Couple that to healthcare costs, it goes out of the roof. Whereas you then go to a system where both these are, in some sense, are covered by our tax. Right
Mm,
now, of course, I think I would resist from making political style statements, but
mm.
across whoever governs us, irrespective of political parties or whatever, it is we pay considerable tax, and in some sense education isn't covered. This is really a challenge. Like today we see all
Very,
this. Yeah,
very important point. Very important point you're making. Yeah.
we have just come out of the neat verdict as we speak, right? Of course there are lots of issues and everything else, but at the bottom of this lies the fact that education is super expensive in
Mm,
India. And it is a very sort of not only disturbing, but a fact that I until this budget did not pay too much attention to, that the I mean, if one earns a salary of, I think, something above a couple of lakhs a year, then it's the top 20% of earners in this country,
mm,
right? So at least what the data says, and for such economic situation to pay so much for education is a real problem. And I think we, as a nation, at some point, probably want to pay attention to how much we spend on education, which is I think, in by some accounts, less than 1% of the GDP. And maybe I would connect this to an anecdotal
yeah,
thing which
yeah.
I heard. I think we know that IIT Madras was funded by the West German Republic initially.
Mm,
The first head of physics department was Professor Walter Koch, And
Yes.
I inherited a lab which was where Professor Rajpal Sirohi and MP Kotial were using optics. I mean, they have had
Wow. Yeah,
installed a
that's a
huge optical table, which is impossible to take out of the lab because I think the wall was built around it, literally.
interesting.
And they have a lot of German instruments and metrology tools which I don't always use, but I made sure not to throw them away. I said I will.
Obviously. Yeah.
Professor, they kept it. They gave it to me. I'll keep it till I retire. It's to remind myself of high international standards. Okay, why I brought that up is because of this. At some time ago, until some time ago, the German embassy used to have a very strong connect with IITM. And at
Mm,
one point, one of their scientific attaches wanted to meet some of us who had PhDs and research experience in Germany. And to strengthen the connection back, he was persuading the case that we should keep the German contact and leverage their high end technology for our research here. And of course, send your students to Germany instead of going to the telling them to go to the US or advising them to go to the US. This was the case he made. So one of my colleagues made bold to say, so why is Germany, willing to pay us to come and work there?
mm,
Literally,
mm,
right? You have your own population, kids and people to do that, right? So why are you doing this, right? So then he had an excellent answer for this, which I haven't forgotten. He said, because we have nothing else.
mm,
What did he mean? He said, look, we are not a very natural resource rich country like India or some of even the African nations. We just have a little bit of coal beneath the ground, nothing else. And it is now too expensive to take the coal out. So we have no other natural resource. It's just rivers flowing, people, and the environment and greenery. That's also why they want to protect environment a lot more, I think, in Germany and Europe. He said, our natural resource is people.
mm,
So
mm,
we really want talent from everywhere. We want to attract talent from everywhere to come and contribute to the economy there, right? And the amazing thing, to a large extent, is some of the historic companies there, such as BMW or Siemens or others. Even they understand this very, very well. So I don't think they put in a lot of their money, but they work with universities and also invest in these universities. My colleague tells me that BMW has a cut open car hanging in the mechanical engineering department of TU Munich. But if I asked once somebody over there about why university companies are so closely connected, because for them the case is obvious. We draw our workforce from there. So, in some sense, the public system there of that type, where uh, the society views this as developing what I call a kind of human infrastructure, which
mm,
is the most important infrastructure. Some economists do make the point from time to time, but I think even as people, I think we probably want to realize that our growth and things will finally depend upon how much we invest in that. And that's also why the clamor for IIT seats, then pressure, NEET engineering seats, and all that. Um, the only maybe solution for this is to, I say, we should invest 10 times more in education. So we have not 20 but 100 IITs, and not 10 but 100 ICERs and such institutes too. And I think the society can afford it. It's not too much to ask to go from, if it's really 0.5% of GDP, to go to few percent of GDP isn't such a big thing, is it? So that's something which I strongly feel about education being accessible. It's nothing is free, as they say, but it should be really accessible to every aspiring child.
fabulous. This is actually such an important point what you emphasized, and also you beautifully connected it to your own experiences, and also tribute to a lot of people who have been part of your education. That is something also which is so important. There is also an element of uh, a kind of exploration on your part, because I think these things don't happen generally, Shiva, unless you are self motivated. uh, and I'm just curious to know, where do you derive your motivation and strength? Kind of, can you give us a little bit of an overview of what what really drives you, what really actually makes you kind of going? uh, I can see that you also had to face a slightly unusual, in fact very unusual situation, where you had to lose one of your parent, unfortunately, at a very early age. That has a very drastic effect on any child. It's something, not a lived experience, but you can relate to that, right? Because it's such an
Yeah.
important thing. Could you please tell us that particular point of how this kind of made you a better person, and also somebody who can take up new challenges, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. And this, I mean, your endeavor is to humanize science, so it is
Yeah.
very human, in my opinion. So, though, first of all, I must credit my wife, who is a medical doctor, surgeon, and I mean, whether she ended up being my spouse or not, which I'm very fortunate to have. I would say she is a person with a great heart. So, over the
you
last
should you should
several
you
years,
should you should mention her by name, and because that's a tribute
yeah.
to the lady also. Yeah, please
Yeah,
do
yeah, yeah.
mention.
I mean, spouse, wife,
Mm.
Shruti Venkatachalam. Shruti is a oncologist, oncosurgeon, ENT surgeon by training, who does oncology. She's a person with a golden heart, and she has taught me to look at the people who have
Mm.
contributed to who we are and what we are. I say that because that's when I've given this much thought. Otherwise, I am not very good at that. Let's just put it
Mm.
that way. I maybe even take some human relationships for granted, but then it is a very important thing, and that Pawan, that's
Mm.
why I think what you're doing is a great endeavor and very important because it presents the human side of this. Otherwise, sometimes what can be looked at as a fairly, very rigorous but dry endeavor, which science hardly is. And looking back
Absolutely.
into history too, we would see, both in all forms. If there was a C.V. Raman, there was, I think it was Ashutosh Mukherjee who
Mm.
enabled things, and
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
likewise, if we take German legends for Einstein, there was support from a lot of people, Planck and whoever, and I
Mm.
just few weeks ago had the immense delight to visit the Curie Museum in Sorbonne University in Paris, and
Yes.
you can
Wonderful.
literally see. I mean, Einstein wrote a consoling letter to Marie Curie
Mm.
when her Polish roots were possibly criticized, and of course, being a woman scientist and lady scientist was
Mm.
an issue. So these things, I think, humanizing science is super important. But so what pushed you, or what holds strength? Well, what keeps us strong in doing science in India, right? I should say my in this regard, I would quote one of whom I consider a legendary scientist and my sort of mentor, Professor M. Krishnamurthy, who's now the director of TFR
Mm.
Center in Hyderabad.
Hyderabad.
So
Yeah.
when I was endeavoring to coming back, like, so I asked him, we call him MK. So what does it take to do science? What does it take, and what do you need to do science in India? His answer was a one-word sentence: guts. Right. So we do
Mm.
need guts to do,
Especially if you are
especially
an experiment.
experimental.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Especially if you're an experimentalist, right? I mean, and I would say it is these wonderful examples. Again, I don't mean to be very, historical and anecdotal about my own journey, but it is, as I said, destiny's child. So while I was doing my while I was teaching at Satyasai University, the laser we had there, the Fond nanosecond laser, which we loved so much, had a power supply issue. It couldn't sort of be recovered easily. And Professor Srinivasan then retired, and there was a bit of a vacuum in the optics
Mm.
domain. So Professor M. Krishnamurthy happens to be an alumnus of Satyasai University, of the Satyasai University. And actually, it's very interesting. While we spoke about free education, right? So my friends often say free education means free of quality. It's a very strong
Mm,
statement, right? So I immediately tell them my in my MSc batch, the gate topper that year was my um, classmate P. Bharat Kumar. He did his MTech PhD in IIT Bombay. He's now working in TSMC in Taiwan. He's
mm,
doing very well. And the optics legacy of this little department in Satyasai University
yeah.
has another very, I mean, my senior, Vishnuvardhan Krishnamachari, he's a
Mm,
lead scientist designing cars, multiphoton microscopes
mm,
for Leica in Mannheim, very close to Heidelberg. Much earlier, Dr. A.V. Sudarshanam, he retired. I think he's now retired from Corning, all the while doing optical fibers, laser diodes, and a
mm,
lot of
mm.
things. Another a year younger to me, Emani Naresh Kumar, he's a faculty
Mm.
in IIT Hyderabad, gate
I know.
topper. Then in maths, Professor N.B. Vinit, he did his studies in
Mm,
mathematics. He's in IIT Hyderabad. My classmate Tamarapalli Venkatesh, he's the head of computer science department in IIT Guwahati.
mm,
He did his MTech in IIT Kanpur. Uh, while it may sound as if I'm very dearly attached to my alma mater, which I'm glorifying, which is not untrue, but the point is that none of us paid for our master's education. I should add, Professor Y. Fadindra, he is in
mm,
the SERC supercomputing department in ISC. And there are several other alumni from the system. E. Prabhakaran, faculty in ISC chemistry department, Professor M. Krishnamurthy, Professor who else? Professor Harshavardhan Wanre in IIT Kanpur.
yeah,
He's an
yeah.
alumnus.
Alumnus,
Professor
yes.
Raghavendra Prasad, now the Vice Chancellor of the university, did his entire career in IAP, was played a central role in also in the Aditya mission and so on. So, what I'm pointing to is that quality education can come from public money without straining
Right.
individual earners, and I think people have paid for it. Of course, you can always do much better. But then, yeah, coming back to the dealing with the arduous and strenuous parts of both education and science in India,
Mm,
in very aspirational institutions like the IITs and ICERs, where we want to match global standards
yeah.
with the cost. With the overseas to Indian cost ratio of our Mars mission, right? Our university is also run on that budget. You put all the IITs together, and that would be the budget of one Utrecht University in the Netherlands, which may have 10 Nobel laureates. And the answer to why we also do not match that is because I think, again, we if we make it 10 times what it is, we would also have more stars in our system, right?
Very.
So what I must really thank Professor M. Krishnamurthy in TFR, who
Mm,
picked me up and said, if you want to learn more about lasers,
mm,
by the way, don't just sit there in a remote place. You should, come to TFR for a while, spend a semester there, see what we are doing, and work with it. And so this happened. I visited him for a semester, and it just being there. And this is the other great font of science and research. Again, I'm Destiny's child. Out of nowhere, I could spend just a semester in TFR, and it made both a great scientific impression and otherwise on me to
mm.
see this remarkable place Homi Baba designed and developed. It was, I think we should say, it was his startup, so to say,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
remarkable, and it really oozes with scientific culture. And I was really a great beneficiary of this, just spending one semester there. um, and I walked into this, very tightly packed lab space, which
Mm.
three professors
Yeah.
occupied.
It's like
The
Japanese lab.
youngest,
Many of the Japanese
pardon,
lab. Many of the
very
Japanese labs
Japanese.
are there.
I've
It's like
never
kind
been to
of.
Japan. I hope to and
Yeah.
address that very much.
Yeah.
a very Japanese lab. I think our labs are all becoming very Japanese, even in
Yeah.
IITM.
Yeah.
But then very Japanese lab. So Professor M. Krishnamurthy, Professor G. Ravindra Kumar, and
Mm.
Professor Deepak Mathur, who of course is now superannuated.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah.
were very kind. Professor Ravindra Kumar was then doing a sabbatical in Japan, but he
Mm.
also shaped me quite a lot in my post-masters education in optics, and he is a walking, embodiment of photonic science, I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and it was a very different thing. They just gave me a picosecond laser and said, okay, do everything. Like,
Mm. Mm.
measure its pulse width, characterize it, put it into a mass spectrometer and do mass spectrometry. I was just shocked. I said, can you do all this in a few months? He said, yeah, no problem. You are more than capable. Don't worry and
Mm.
stuff like that. You were literally left in that lab, literally alone to do figure
Wow.
out everything. Where do I get who's going to teach me this? No, nobody's going to teach me. You'll figure out. You talk to people. So I mean, then the legendary PhD products of that lab in Department of Nuclear and Atomic Physics. Dr. Rajiv Patatil, he's now leading a group in AstraGemini in
Mm.
Rutherford Appleton Labs in the UK. Then there's Professor Arvinder Sandhu, who's now in Arizona University.
Mm.
Um, Dr. Jagannath Jha, he's a scientist in TIFR in Mumbai himself, and M. Anand. They were all my gurus teaching me the science. But then it instilled in you the thing that first you can do world class science in India, and at least, I mean, class or whatever, very competitive, internationally competitive science in India. You go and see a whole peloton,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I mean peers like Umesh Kadane, who is now in IST. I mean, if I needed to know how channel electron multiplier works, you literally did this in the cafeteria and canteens and during a cup of tea or whatever. You just walked up to your colleague and asked, and they were very happy to teach you a lot about these things. And you walk into the workshop. TFR workshop was a great education
Mm.
for me. I'm actually in touch with some of colleagues back from then on social media or Facebook now, like engineer called Mr. Jamal Gulabrao,
Mm. Mm.
things like that. These things continue. But MK instilled in me this thing that you can do very good science in India, and we must endeavor to do. And he used to tell me even during my PhD. I mean, these were philosophical discussions. So he told me that the sign of you having graduated with your PhD, apart from your certificates, is if tomorrow somebody gives you a piece of lab space
Mm.
and some money, some resources, you should be able to build up everything
From
with your
scratch.
own hands and raise it. And he told me, see, I have done plumbing for my lab, electricals for my
Mm.
lab,
Mm.
everything. So this was the thing. And in my formative impression of much more impressionable years, this made a lasting impression on me. And everybody, Professor Mathur, like once I remember I asked him, do we have a spare multimeter? He asked
Mm.
why. I said that it's broken. I said, oh yeah, there was a time when people used to fix these things, right? So I got my message. Okay, opened it and checked with maybe another one to and fixed a broken multimeter. It's not that you could not afford it, but that was the culture there, and this
Exactly.
really ingrains these things, and that I think is a really important value system which brought up our on which we I was fortunate to be brought up. Therefore, going to Germany, a country
Mm.
where, especially in the better institutes, I was very fortunate to get into the Max Planck Institute for
Mm.
Kern Physics or Nuclear Physics in Heidelberg for my PhD, which was also thanks to Professor Krishnamurthy, who had a Max Planck partner group and had invited my to be PhD advisor. I'm really blessed to have worked with him, Professor Joachim Ulrich,
Mm.
who retired as the president of PTB, which is the
Mm.
NIST of Germany. He was
Germany.
earlier
Yeah.
Max
Yeah.
Planck director. So Joachim was at a conference in actually organized by NK in this lovely location, Khandala. So he invited me, and then I started looking for PhD positions overseas because there is the other big devil in the Indian system, competitive exams.
Yeah.
I it didn't fit me that I write a competitive exam and search for PhDs in India. Though before I joined Satyasai University, I had written GATE. I got a pretty decent rank. I think it was something like 40 or so. I applied for MTech Optoelectronics in IIT Delhi. I vividly
Ah,
remember this.
that's a
And
famous program there. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and then it was headed by Professor Tyagarajan, whom I should mention considerably. It so happened that my mother had transitioned to Delhi on a transfer those few years. So I had the opportunity to go there for vacations.
Mm,
So I had written I wanted to be in MTech Optoelectronics and IIT Delhi. I applied to them, and in fact I in the merit list of the interview, I think I topped the merit list in the interview. In the interview, there were Professor Tyagarajan Bishnupal, who's now a dean at
mm,
Mahindra University, and
yeah,
Professor Joby Joseph, who's now leading the Center
yeah.
for Photonics there. And they were very impressed with a project that I had done in my master's, which was to use transfer matrix techniques to simulate fiber Bragg gratings and make some sensing structures out of it. They were very happy with that. So
Mm.
I had an offer for MTech Optoelectronics, Applied Optics, and a PhD in IIT Delhi. I had also interviewed an ISC. I recall making it to the Center of Theoretical Sciences. Professor B. Anantnarayanan was in my
Ah,
interview
yes,
at
yes.
that time.
He's
So
appeared
it was
on the podcast. Yeah, yeah,
Yes, I was listening to
yeah,
Anand's very nice podcast also. But then I wanted to continue. That's the thing, right? When you said pay forward.
yeah.
So I thought I should continue teaching physics in this place that really gave me this very high quality education to sort of put it forward. So that's why I said I'm not doing any master's or PhD at this point. I'll go back to my university and teach. So I love doing that. So I did that for a few years. But then, as I said, you need a PhD and things. And I thought, why not go get a PhD, then come back and serve the system as you plan to do. So when Professor Krishnamurthy had this conference, I went to this, and then he Joachim said in his talk or something that we're also looking for PhDs and postdocs. I think people always say that, right? But then I took it very seriously. After his talk during the cup of tea session, I asked him, Professor Ulrich, so I'm looking for a PhD, like,
Mm.
and stuff like that. He said, oh, okay. But luckily, what happened is MK had given me a little hot topic talk to present. So I had made a little presentation. He said, "Oh yeah, yeah, I saw your talk. Like, yeah, maybe you would be suitable. Let me, talk to my folks
Yeah.
back in Germany." And
Mm,
he said, "We have a position where we want to collaborate with Krishnamurti. So
mm,
maybe you would be suitable for that because you may have to also spend like some part of the time in TIFR."
mm,
And then he spoke and everything. One thing led to another, and he said, "Yeah, okay, you can. You have to come to Germany for an interview and so
mm,
on the next day." Then I said, "Okay, that may be difficult for me and
mm,
whatever." It just so happened that the Max Planck Graduate School chair, Professor Dieter Bauer, he had also come for that conference. He was like listening to our chat, and then he
mm,
said, Joachim, maybe we should talk about this. Then he said, see, we can consider, apparently, he told my advisor that they will take this presentation I had made to be my interview because there was no
mm,
Zoom and online interviews then.
yeah, yeah.
So they were very kind to take up all this, and this really put me on track. But in the German system, I think you need to build something for your experimental physics PhD, whether it's a good German university or which is not as rich as a Max Planck or whatever. Building instruments is super important over there. And when I joined my PhD, I asked my PhD advisor, so where is my like lab and this thing in a very coy, typical person. Like my first flight journey was to Frankfurt and Heidelberg.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was very, very intimidated by the whole setting. But fortunately, my peer, Dr. Ram Gopal, who's now in
Yeah. Yeah.
TIFR Hyderabad,
Yeah, Hyderabad.
he was already there, so he comforted me a lot. I should really thank Ram for it. And it was truly, truly intimidating. And I went to a guest house over there where there was literally no one else I could see, and it was a lot of loneliness hits you. But then when I asked my advisor where should I do my work, I think that was the only time he could manage to come to the lab. But they have a whole, setup and the Max Planck system. He came, he showed me a patch of lab space. He said there. I said like, but that's just the floor. I didn't say it, but asked him there. He said, yes, yes, don't worry, you'll have everything. That my people, I mean, people here are very helpful. Trust me, and they will organize everything. So you had to put up the frame, the vacuum chamber, and everything on which the experiment was done. You literally built it out of uh, the Lego blocks, that
Mm,
figuratively
mm.
the components there, and procured something else and built. So this was a great culture. And then I really, the MK had trained me for this much before, and the German system trains you to raise a whole lab from scratch, often even as a PhD student. So this, I think, is perfect upbringing for coming back and doing science in India to whatever level.
Fabulous, fabulous. I'm so glad to actually, learn this trajectory. You can see the at a granular level, there are so many interesting influences, and you will kind of learn new things and adapt it, and that takes its own life, right? That is something which is very, very fabulous about it. So, in the last
Absolutely.
few minutes, Shiva, please tell us a little bit more about the kind of current problems and questions you are asking in your group, and what are the kind of plans you have in the coming years and months and things like that.
So, my approach to research has always been to work in light matter interaction because that is what I got fascinated by. I think optics, yes, pure optics is wonderful. I have just without consciously making an effort drifted away from it, in the sense doing interferometry or
Hmm.
things like that would have also been a possibility or a choice, but light matter interaction is my go-to science theme, and I continue to explore various aspects within it. So in that sense, I haven't stuck to saying, okay, I will further only, like, something in fiber optics or this or that. Wherever there is an interesting problem, opportunity, and it's also feasible, I've endeavored to, or I do still and will continue to put efforts in that direction. And again, to mention my mentor once again, MKN, but of course, everyone, a lot of senior colleagues who have impressioned me, and also peers, the idea has always been to bring some new thing into Indian science. That is, try and find out something which we are not already doing anywhere else in India, and try to bring that home, right?
Hmm.
So in that sense, I have also uh, I work and will continue to work in light matter interaction with on going towards X-ray wavelengths. That is something which we do
Wow.
not do too much in India. We do have a synchrotron, but
Hmm.
ever since towards the end of my PhD,
Hmm.
after working with very short few cycle femtosecond pulses, very intense femtosecond pulses, where we were doing intense laser matter interaction and studying gas phase nanoplasmas and
Hmm.
so on,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
got introduced to this very wonderful system of helium nanodroplets, which are helium clusters, very unique. This is the bosonic helium 4. So they form a superfluid even on a nanoscale. I don't directly study the superfluid properties and things, but it's a very fascinating system. There are at least three professors in Germany who have spent their entire careers on this and
Hmm.
still continue to do very fascinating work. But that is one system. I have been working in, and I think I will continue probing that at least bits and pieces of it, of this fascinating system throughout my remaining career. And in that sense, coupling these to uh, modern, very short
Sure.
pulse sources, as well as high quality, what we call fourth generation sources, advanced synchrotron sources. That's something which I would continue to do now. At the forefront of photon science in terms of technology are free electron lasers. So we continue to do that. When I say free electron lasers, X-ray free electron lasers, that have been microwave and infrared free electron lasers for a very long time. So that's one another aspect which I'm endeavoring to work with, and it's globally very competitive. There are, I think, only five X-ray free electron lasers in the world. One of their goals is to do single pulse diffractive imaging
Mm,
of
mm,
objects. This will revolutionize the way people do crystallography. Now, there is background science being done with these photon sources, so that is one direction I will take. And the other natural consequence of working with few cycle, very short optical laser pulses, which earlier were based on titanium sapphire lasers. Now it's
mm,
becoming more the ytterbium system, is try and look at dynamics on much shorter time scales. So attosecond science, which is the current Nobel Prize theme for a few
mm,
more months, is another important edifice. There is, I would say, a spin-off of this attosecond science, which is that earlier, to produce short wavelength radiation, we were forced to go to a synchrotron. But now, with much smaller, although these lasers are not that small, they need half of a bed to place them in terms of area. Um, so these lasers are making X-ray photons accessible even to relatively small labs, and this is wonderful. Like we can have access to this at a fraction of a cost, and I say this is a technology made for India too. We can take that,
mm,
study dynamics, but also do imaging. And there is a huge push now. Companies have invested hundreds of millions in extreme UV lithography at 13.5 nanometers. There is, I think, and that sort of science is not yet there in India. But these 13.5 nanometer sources are based on intense nanosecond lasers, ablating tin droplets to create a plasma, laser plasma, as we would call it, and then short wavelength radiation. These sources have a very long way to go.
mm,
In fact,
mm,
after my PhD, when I went into IBM SRDC in Bangalore, I just over a cup of coffee mentioned this to my colleague and my manager, saying, "Hey, look, I did these nanoplasmas for my PhD, and the one of the transitions in xenon actually emits 13.5.
mm,
Xenon and lithium are good candidates. So is tin." I said, "I think this is very fascinating, blah blah." Then he said, "Hey, did you work on that? Why don't we try and work on a patent for these sources?" So it was literally scribbling on a napkin. Then we went and we could file a US patent with a couple of colleagues there. So, but this science, now with India having four fabs, I think we will enter into the sort of X-ray domain as well. So certainly advancing research in this direction will have future generations getting prepared for this. So that is something I would like to also contribute to, but without meaning to take too much more of this interview's time. Something that inherently happens while we study these kind of systems is that we do a lot of correlated measurements or coincidence measurements.
mm,
And if one thinks about it, that we why we are doing this, or are push we are pushed to do this, is because these are quantum systems. They thrive
mm,
on correlations, and to measure correlations we need to do coincident measurements. So now what one realizes is that atoms and molecules, or as one very senior scientist says, now the two electrons in helium have always been entangled since the universe came
mm,
out to be. So now my thrust is also to try and measure these much more quantum properties with electrons, photons, and also say ions and others, and uh, make this a lot more quantum. Not that it already isn't, but do it the quantum 2.0 or 3.0 way that things are now. ramping up. So quantum science and technologies to with particular attention is also something which I endeavor to do. But last but not the least, I must say that I'm being paid by a technology institute or a technical
mm,
university. So looking to translate this research from science to technology to society is also something I feel is very important. And a lot of my students, especially the masters and undergrads, are engineering students. So I also do and will endeavor to have students at this level come and wet their hands in a research
mm,
lab and contribute and do technology based research. In fact, in this sense, I would say that the three of our undergrad and master students, they've gone for physics PhDs. One is working with the one of the most intense lasers in Salamanca in Spain. He's a PhD
mm,
student at University of Maryland, and last year a student who worked on optics. He's now working at Colorado University in NIST. He wants to do AMO science, and he's already doing this at a very high level. And this year too, one of our students, he is going to Caltech. He did his undergrad project. He is probably going to work even with mode locked on-chip
mm,
lasers, I think. So I think this transition from between science and technology, it's actually a lot of fun if we think about it.
mm,
That would be great. And last but not the least, I must say that my spouse is also becoming my collaborator. I think there are things one can apply to even for medical science. Of course, this sounds like a lot, but in some sense, we are playing with pebbles on a beach. So if there
mm.
is a good idea, be open to exploring, translating, and making fun things out of it. And that's really why I think being in this profession remains both privilege, honor, and fun. So that really is what I think keeps us going, and I look forward to this in the future too.
Fabulous, Shivas. This is truly kind of, you've given a beautiful overview of the kind of work what you and your group are already doing, and also what you want to venture into. Uh, yeah, it's been a wonderful conversation, because rarely you will get a person who has such a kind of an elaborate thought, which has gone to understand how he himself has done it. There is an element of self-reflection, and also there's also an element of guts. Not just only in terms of starting research, but also importantly in overcoming hurdles in his own life. That really motivates a lot of us, and also hopefully it gives an avenue for people who want to derive inspiration from people like you. So I'm very thankful to you in giving us this overview.
I also would like to thank you, Pawan, and add a note that this thing about humanizing science, it is wonderful. There is just one other thing I would mention is that the other big human aspect of science is also collaboration. I must really thank my collaborators, especially long-time collaborators, Professor Marcin Modric, Dr.
Mm,
Robert Richter, Dr. Marcelo Coreno, who enabled opportunities for me to do some science overseas, which today is not possible in India.
mm,
Professor Thomas Pfeiffer, Dr. Robert Mozama, all of them are not just colleagues, collaborators between friends and colleagues, and that is a great part in humanizing science. I'm very fortunate also to have colleagues like them overseas, and Professor Vandana Sharma, my
mm.
great friend in IIT Hyderabad, Dr. Ram
Excellent.
Gopal, Professor MK himself. All these colleagues do that, and I am a constant, you can say, to put it in modern lingo, sucker for good collaborations, which I think
Nice.
make science a lot more fun and a lot more human. So I'd like to thank all these people, friends, extended scientific family, and certainly you, Pawan, for making this channel, open, available to everybody, and bringing the human side of us in. And of course, needless to say, students, postdoc, and all the lab mates who toil, they are part of the family, and it's such a
Absolutely.
pleasure and honor to have all of them as our
Absolutely.
mates.
My pleasure. Absolutely my pleasure. My pleasure. So this is Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. This time, one and the only Siva. Thank you, Siva.
Thank you so much, Pawan. Pleasure.